Hi everybody and welcome to LogPoint. My name is Henrik Berggren. I am based at LogPoint in the office in Stockholm, Sweden. And I'm running the pre-sales side of things up here in the Nordic countries. So that's Sweden, Norway, Finland, and the Baltics. And I've been here for, about 10 years. So I've been with LogPoint since we actually started up in Sweden. And today's topic on this WebEx is called Applied Analytics. And that's a project that I was actually part of initiating quite a few years back. So, and this has its also relation to some of the customers we have here in my region, namely the medical regions, the hospital regions here in Sweden. So I'll explain to you guys what this is about. So let's see if this works. So first I thought I'd just make a super short introduction to the company LogPoint as such, since I think there's some new names here on the list. So normally I introduce ourselves as a Scandinavian company. We are headquartered and founded in Copenhagen by a Danish entrepreneur called Søren Laustrup. And I joined Søren, as I said, a little more than 10 years ago when he was starting up the stuff here in Sweden. And we've grown organically since into the European continent. So today we have offices here in Stockholm, in Helsinki, in Copenhagen, of course, and also in the UK, France, and Germany, covering the rest of the European continent. And since a couple of years back, we also have an office in the US in Boston. So our founder, Søren, is living over there since 2 years back, setting up our business over there. So the company has grown, and the last few years have been really fortunate for us. The demand for these kind of systems has grown enormously, I would say, and not least with the introduction of GDPR. So that has really put some focus on the need for control of where information is being, how it's being handled and who is being accessing it and who is doing what and when and from where and so on. So that's sort of the short story about the company. We have been growing extremely well here in the Nordic region in the last couple of years. And that's really thanks to our partners. So we only sell through partners, integrators and partners that we work with. And that's also true for this solution with Applied Analytics. We provide the software sort of platform and the partner is doing the integration working with the customers to fine-tune the use cases and the criteria and so on. So we'll get back to that in a minute. So our sort of premier product is called the LogPoint SIEM product, which is a log management and analysis solution that provides a unified view into your organization's IT, gives you eyes into your IT environment, if you like. It also provides a central secure storage of the logs for not least for forensics purposes, that you are sure you still have the logs and that they haven't been tampered with. And on top of this, you can then have automated analysis and alerting and some powerful tools for searching and analyzing this, not least for forensics purposes and security operating centers, but also for help desks, just for troubleshooting and just making sure everything's working as it should, or maybe assisting in support issues. Maybe users have problems with logging in or whatever. Of course, many customers don't work that actively directly in LogPoint. They rely more on reports and alerts, and that's also, of course, supported. And as I said, GDPR has really been pushing this forward. Now, the whole purpose of LogPoint is really to find the needles in the haystack. And in a typical IT environment, you will be collecting logs from, probably hundreds, even thousands of log sources. And they all provide lots of information, but that information doesn't look the same depending on the source. So just by collecting everything together, those logs will still have very different look and feel in between them, different structure and contents. So just by getting it all in one place, you still have a lot of unstructured data. So the first thing we do when we receive the logs is to create a structure. We call that process normalization. And in short, it just means that we tag the information in the logs and give the different pieces of information a name, like a typical IT, like a networking product could be source address and protocol and destination port, those kind of things. Or in Windows logs, it could be event ID, username, what have you. And then on top of that, you can then do your analysis and use those tags to filter and sort and create tables and graphs in a simple way. So this is typically how an IT department works, and this is what a typical LogPoint user interface could look like. So far, everything is good. But what about staff outside the IT department? That's where this starts to get a bit tricky. And with the introduction of GDPR and also other data privacy regulations around the world, you really need to start looking into how sensitive information is being accessed by your own staff. And that's typically done out in the administrative part of your organization, right? So that would be in a hospital, that will be in the different hospital departments or doctor's offices. In an insurance company, that could be in the financial department, and so on and so forth. So, and the reviews that you need to do typically also needs to be handled, by the local departments, because it's really hard to sit in a central position and sort of gauge if a specific access is sort of relevant or not for a person who is in another city or another country even. So we really need to keep this local. Again, medical organizations, any organization that keeps sensitive personal information, or financial, including SAP customers and so on, they really need to have these kind of checks in place. So the information is there. It's most likely all there in the application logs, but the traditional LogPoint user interface is way too technical for those kind of users. So that's when applied analytics started to take shape. And it really feels a big need for customers, like local municipalities, healthcare organizations, financial organizations, and such. And just to backtrack a little bit, sort of a brief history of how this all came about. So it really was born as an idea back already in 2014, as far as I remember, when a medical region here in Sweden were looking for a solution. And they wanted to replace a pretty complex and time-consuming manual process to review staff accesses to medical information in their medical journal systems. And during this meeting, these first meetings, it was immediately apparent for everyone that the traditional LogPoint user interface is too complex and too technical for a typical medical staff user in that case. So that's where applied analytics was born as an idea, and we started to develop it for this particular customer, and then more of these medical regions joined in, and the system was developed in cooperation with those, with the feedback from them, both in the pilot testing and also then as it went into production. And as we speak, there are more of these applications being integrated. And this is work typically done by our partners. So like in my country or in my region, prominent partners have been SecureLink, Cygate, and Istekki in Finland, who are working closely with us on these integrations. And this has all really resulted in a solution that is really highly flexible and adaptable to other types of systems. So that's when we decided that it might be a good idea to run a WebEx like this to introduce it to a broader audience. So the building blocks are really, you need to have a traditional LogPoint server established. That's sort of the basic platform for this. And that's also where you store the logs. So that's what provides the log archive and so on. And of course, you can still also use that for doing deeper analysis and so on for the more technical people. But for the non-technical, you have this optional add-on server called Applied Analytics, which is a separate web server that provides a simple web interface, very easy to use, totally designed for non-IT users, and with a workflow that has also been designed from input from our current customers. And it's very flexible and also highly secure. So I'll get back to some of those parts. So when you get into the application space, it's not so much a technical challenge. It's more having a fast response and analysis of information access in general terms. So what most customers probably are doing today is traditional spot checking. That's what they're doing in the medical organizations. They pull maybe 100 patients out of a hat, and they have a look at who has been looking at these patients. Does everything look okay, and so on. In a financial department running SAP, for instance, they might also pull a number of transactions and check those. And since there are so many transactions and so many medical journal accesses typically in a month, the chance of finding something by doing spot checking is slim, to put it that way. So our experience is that it's very rare that you find something during these checks. So what we then do in Applied Analytics is something called Smart Reports. So you can actually pull reports that will give you a subset of these accesses or these transactions, and you will be able to focus more on activities that for some reason may look like they are maybe out of the ordinary. And then, of course, you can also work directly in the LogPoint server centrally, maybe in the central team. So you have these different steps they can take, and you can also use this as an escalation sort of process. So very sort of fundamental for all this is to get the information in from the application, obviously. And I mentioned the normalization, where we apply the tags to the information. So these are anonymized, fully anonymized logs from a healthcare system. I'm just using healthcare as a use case example here. So these are logs. They could be any application logs, really, but these are logs that contain a username, so that's an employee name, a patient name in this case, and a social security number, and which department this is being done at, and the timestamp and all that stuff. So doing the normalization is really about identifying these different parts in the log and give them a name. So here we have some more system-related stuff like which log source it came from, the device IP, and so on. But we also have the information from the application itself, which is the name of the patient, the social security number, the departments where the in this case the medical journal notation was created once upon a time, and also where it was read at this point, and stuff like that. And of course the name of the user or the employee who has been reading it, and so on. So that's the basic step of creating some structure in the data, and after that you can start creating tables like this, or turn it into more advanced analytics, in this case in the user interface in the LogPoint server, where you can get an overview of the activities that have been going on, and maybe zoom in on particular types of activities. In this case, we're looking at, this is all in Swedish. So in this case, we're looking at, for instance, patients that have their name protected for some reason, that they are anonymous patients because maybe they have some kind of a threat scenario around them or something. So that's sort of the basic starting point. Now, the benefits of then adding an applied analytics service to this is to provide the non-technical users a tool to be part of the reviewing of this stuff. So first of all, again, it's an easy-to-use web interface for both ad hoc searches, but you can also schedule reports, and there's a review process for that later. You authenticate using SAML tickets, which will assign the permissions for each user that dictates what they are able to see in those reports. So that, for instance, an employee in a specific department can maybe only see stuff that is relevant for that department. Maybe colleagues on that department, maybe it's a manager of a department. He or she can only look at his or her employees in that department, and activities that have been happening in that department, not in the next department, and so on. And this can be quite flexibly assigned in these permissions. Then there's a lot of workflows that's been worked into this. So first of all, everything in this application can be translated and renamed. So you can also then adjust it to any language. So we have made all these installations in local Swedish language, of course, and in Finland, they will be doing it in Finnish language. Again, that's actually quite high on the wish list for these type of customers, that we provide this in local language and not in English. So that's all there, of course. You can also work and define your own reports and customize reports for your own needs. You can also do an ad hoc search through this application. And if you find something there that you think is looking a little bit strange, you can then turn that into a report that will then go into the review workflow. And the workflow as such is that you can read it, you can comment the report, you can approve or disapprove it, you can archive it. And in the latest version, there's also a facility to create an email link, either for the entire report or just for a line in the report. So that if you're hesitant about something, or maybe you want a manager or a colleague to check it, you can actually create a link that you can email to that colleague, and they will then be able to click on that link and get into Applied Analytics and see exactly what the link is about. So you don't have to send any information anywhere. So you typically don't want to have reports floating around in mailboxes and stuff. So this is just links that are going back and forth. So those are example of workflow improvements we've done that might be maybe a little bit different than in other kind of systems. So this is really optimized for working in a large organization and pushing out the responsibility to review these reports. So this means that you can actually have several layers of review here. So first of all, you can have a central log review team. That's very common, that you have a more specialized team centrally, either in the medical sector, people who are responsible for the medical journal systems, or maybe the team that is responsible for an SAP installation at a customer. They would be typically specialists, and they would also typically be trained on the LogPoint server itself. So they would be able to use both LogPoint as such and also the Applied Analytics server. And by giving them permissions, wide enough permissions, they would be able to, for instance, see all the reports that have been generated and that are awaiting approval and so on, and they can push to make sure that the approval process is moving forward. And then you can set up so that local staff, the local departments can review their parts. And you may also have some external log reviewers that you need to bring in. So in a financial organization, that might be external auditors or external consultants. In the medical area, it might be the local city in that medical region, which also are accessing the central medical journal systems, for instance, or it could be private care organizations that are also part of the entire sort of care providing services. So the way we have built this really allows you to push it out into these kind of organizations, which is a huge benefit, of course. So just making a few examples from medical journals, since that's the area I've been working mostly with. This is, typically what we provide in a medical environment, where there are three really different kind of steps to this. So if we start from the beginning, The first step is typically to establish a LogPoint server platform and start reading in this case, the medical journal system logs. And most applications, whatever they are, they typically log in either in text files or in databases. And in this case, in the medical journal systems case, they typically log in large central databases. So we import that information via SQL statements so that we get all the information we need about the various accesses to medical journal systems. And we normalize that, and we store it in the LogPoint server in the archiving structures that we can provide in the LogPoint server itself. And then the applied analytics server is deployed. You can see that up here. And that's, like I said, a separate server. That is a web server that connects into the LogPoint server through the query API that is part of the LogPoint server itself. So it will communicate with the LogPoint server over an API and provide the user interface to the non-technical users. And out of the box, you have really two kind of standard reports. One is we call it a patient report, where the employee can pull a report to see which employees have been looking at a particular patient during a time period. And this kind of report can often be required by the patient, him or herself. So in Sweden, at least, you have the legal rights to get these kind of reports so that you can check who has been looking at your medical journal notations. The other one is to see, which patients has a specific employee been looking at, and that might be part of the follow-up activities they are using in the departments. But like I said, these are the two standard out-of-the-box reports, and then you can actually also design your own. And I'll come back to that later. But the query language, sort of the search language in LogPoint, can be fully used when you design these reports. So you have, again, great flexibility in how you set these up. Now, the next step would then be also to bring in the central team, and they would typically have access directly to the LogPoint server. So they would be, normally they would be more sort of used to IT systems, and maybe they've been looking into medical journal systems or SAP systems logs manually before, so they typically have reasonable knowledge of what it's all about, and they typically experience a huge benefit of a system like LogPoint because it makes it so much easier to search and sort and filter and so on among those logs. And this is also typically the group where anything that is being found in the departments gets escalated into, so that they may have to do some more deep diving into the logs to further investigate the whatever has been found in the department. But there's another difference here as well. Whereas the departmental reviewers typically only can see their own department, the central team can typically see the entire organization. So in a medical region, that could encompass several hospitals, for instance. And they typically have a bit of a different use cases than on a department. They will look more of an umbrella and have a look at, for instance, if someone has been looking at a patient where the patient in question has not been anywhere close, a doctor's office or a hospital for the last 3 or 6 months, that's kind of strange. They may be looking into sensitive patients that they know about. They might look into also sensitive departments, like psychiatry departments. So if someone from the orthopedic department is looking into medical journals from the psychiatry department, that doesn't really make sense, and you might want to ask some questions about that. So, so there are lots of those things. And just to make a very important point here is that whatever organization you look at doing this together with, you really need to get the people from the administrative part. At the first meeting, they should be part of that. Because the use cases that eventually end up to be the ones that are used are typically not the use cases that the IT people think of first, to put it mildly. So we learned that the hard way. that you really need to have in healthcare, for instance. You really need to have the nurses and doctors and whatever part of this to define what is meaningful to dig out from the systems. Because that in turn will then also dictate what kind of logs we need to dig out from the medical journal systems. And the same would be true for a financial organization or a local city or so. So that's a strong recommendation that you bring in someone from the actual from the organization to be part of these projects early to define the use cases. Then in Sweden, we also have a couple of regions that have actually integrated with a public portal that is run by the government. It's called 1177.se. And that's a medical portal that citizens in Sweden can log into using their bank ID, for instance. And in some of those regions, you can also drill down and eventually get a report on who has been looking at your medical journals. And that report is coming directly from a LogPoint server in that case. So that's also extremely helpful for the staff at those hospitals, that they don't need to pull those reports manually themselves anymore. So this is all an example from the healthcare, but you could also think about a more generic organization where you have information, either financial or personal or otherwise. It could also be intellectual property kind of information, whatever, where you want to be able to distribute the review of the access of that information into the different departments. And then maybe also have some central function that is able to handle the more difficult cases, and also maybe some other use cases. And on top of that, when you do this, you also will establish a platform for the other parts of the IT operations, so like anything from help desk for troubleshooting and so on, to IT security teams and so on. So it really becomes a super useful solution once you get it up and running across the organization like this. Because in this case, for instance, if you find that someone has been accessing information in a strange way, you might need to actually look into maybe the firewall logs or the VPN access logs and so on, to see how was this information accessed, from where, from which computer, and did somebody do this on purpose, or has the computer been infected? And that's where you need to bring in maybe the IT operations and IT security teams. So it all makes a lot of sense once you start looking at it this way, to have this combination of technical and otherwise non-technical users. All right, so I prepared some screenshots, and I also have a demo system I thought I'd just show you briefly. So again, the architecture, just to make this a bit more clear, is based on a LogPoint server at the bottom, where you pull in the application data and store it in the archive in LogPoint. You connect the Applied Analytics server via an API, and the Applied Analytics server will also send its audit logs into LogPoint, and the LogPoint server itself will be auditing everything that's happening, all the queries that have been run and so on. So you will have full auditing safely stored in the LogPoint server. And then when you authenticate as a user, you do that through a SAML ticket, for instance, to the AD, and you get your permissions, and then you can start pulling your reports. So that's sort of the basic flow. And the user interface in the Applied Analytics, this is a screenshot from the administrative backend, if you like. So this is where you see, this is actually a very long list of items that are present here in the user interface. So you can rename anything here, all these little icons and all the buttons, all the fields, everything, you can rename it to whatever you want. There's a default, obviously, naming of all this stuff, but you can rename it to whatever you want. In this case, we made a Swedish translation for something. You could do it in any language or adapt it to any kind of system, so that you can also name things that are sort of intuitive to the users, so that the naming conventions here match what they are used to use in the system in question. All right, so this is an important part, that you have this flexibility. Then you can also have the flexibility of mapping the tags that we have normalized in the logs from the application, you can map those to any field in the applied analytics application. And again, there are some default tags here. These are the normalized tags here. And there are some default ones, but you can rename them and you can map them to whatever you like inside the application. So again, a lot of flexibility here in how you want to use the data. And just to be clear here, it's typically not that much different information that you need to pull just to make these, at least these basic reports. It's kind of quite straightforward. All right, so that's the back end. And with that, having said that, I think I'll swap into the demo system. So this is what the Applied Analytics login page looks like. And so this is the Applied Analytics server we're looking at right now. And I also have another tab here with the LogPoint server behind that. So this is the actual LogPoint server. Here you see all the raw logs from a healthcare application. And you can imagine that this is probably way too complicated for a typical medical person to deal with. And if nothing else, it's easy that you get it wrong, right? So the Applied Analytics is a much simpler prospect. So you can log in locally, or you can have external authentication. We are using an ADFS server here. So I'll just log in. Demo. So this is what the typical user interface looks like. Super simple. And you can even set it up so that a user can only search on, in this case, a patient, or only search on a user, or in this case, both. So you have flexibility also in how you assign the permissions for the Applied Analytics users. And here you have a number of fields that you can fill in, and a date range. So here you could type a patient's social security number and or a user ID. So maybe you just want to see which patients a specific user has been looking at. Then you type in the user ID. Or you can type in both if you want to see if a specific user has been looking at a specific patient, right? So so you have all the options there. And down here you will have a drop-down list with the in this case the care providers. So that would be the various hospitals in this region. This is all demo data, faked, of course. So if I choose one here, Oasis Hospital, I might get a number of choices here on the actual departments in there. And then I can choose a time range down here. And then over here, I have my history. So if I click on this one, for instance, that will populate my screen, as you see. So I'll remove that. So I can run this search. Let's say the patient has asked me, did anyone out of the ordinary look at my journal back in December? You can just dial that in and you click search and you get this report. And this is then straight from the LogPoint server in the background. So these are communicating now over the API. And here you will then, this is all faked logs. So you will see that the patient is called Oliver Hellström. And then you have a number of different employees who have been dealing with this patient. Here you can see the role they were using when they logged into the medical journal system in this case. And here you will see the different work and care units. So those are organizational units in Sweden. And in a real system, these would be actually in clear text. It would say orthopedic, such and such, and what the departments are. And here you see the date. And also in the back end, you can decide if you want to be able to see every single access that has been done by a specific user in a day, or if you just want to have them aggregated per day, so you can get the reports a little bit shorter. Anyway, so this is what it looks like. Here you can, if I go back to the search and run it again, I can actually also say that I just want to have 10 random samples. Let's say for specific types of criteria, you might still end up with a huge number of results. So you may want to randomize it a little bit. So here I can just choose 10 random samples. And again, the system will automatically just randomize 10 different, in this case, users that have been looking at this patient. So that's that. And then on top of that, you can then also, from a report, let's see, you can save this as a report. So I can save this and I can call it like a patient random 10, whatever, and save it. So this means that I now have a report down here, and it now is part of the review process. So here you have some various options. So first of all, up here you can filter. So if I just want to have reports that contain the name patient, you can just type patient. Or something else. You can see, only look at the unreviewed or the archived or the reviewed ones. You can see everyone, the failed ones, the partially successful and the successful. And here you can actually look at the report, and it's the same one as we just saw, right? And here I can go in and comment. I can say, well, this looks a bit strange, question mark, submit. So that becomes a comment. I can now see that there is a comment here. There's some dots there. So that's up there. I can also flag this. And I can also click on this email icon. Now, I haven't set this up on my machine, but then I would get my email client up and I would have a link to this particular line in the report in my email. I could send it to a colleague for checking. So it's really quite straightforward, and there are various tools, and also to clean up this report archive once they are reviewed and so on, so that you don't explode with too many reports and so on. So that's really some of the really basic stuff in the how you can pull this up. As you can also see, there is the option here also to save and to print. So if I save it, again, it will be saved as a report. So if I'm pulling a report like this and think this is not right, I can save it as a report, and it goes into the review process. Cool. So on the LogPoint server, then you have the same logs. This is the raw information that is used by the Applied Analytics server. And here you have other tools for looking at. You can see there's some different users that have been involved with this. I have the patient personal number up here as a filter. I can see which units have been logging this, and blah, 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 blah. And I can click on emergency. I just want to see the emergency logs. That's part of now on my filter, and I only see those. And now there's some different user IDs maybe involved, and so on. So this is more for the more technical users, typically in the central groups. But they can dig much deeper into this, and they can also combine this when they find a time range, for instance. A time when something happened, they can match that with other logs if you also collect logs from your infrastructure and so on. So that's how they really work in combination really well. They're really, really highly integrated. And this query language we have up here, that's exactly what we're using also in the Applied Analytics application when we, for instance, define the report templates and so on. These are some screenshots that have been anonymized from an installation that was made by SecureLink in a hospital in Sweden. So this is just a visualization of the stuff I just mentioned. So this is a dashboard that is being used by the central log review group. So they can look across the entire medical region in this case. And what this symbolizes, these colored boxes, what they symbolize is that in the first box, we have about 62,000 unique combinations of patients and employees in the access logs in the medical journals. So they're vastly more accesses, but there are 62,000 unique combinations of patients and employees. So this is typically where you start doing your spot checking. This is the bucket where you do your spot checking normally. But out of those 62,000, there's 9,000 that haven't been, doesn't have the recorded visit to a doctor's office or a hospital in 30 days or more, which, might be okay. Maybe they are long-term in long-term sickness or so. So they're patients, but they don't go to the hospital every month. But out of those 9,000, there's 500 who also don't have a prescription for medication. And so they're probably not under medical procedures. And this is where you then can start to probably suspect that why have you been looking at these patients? This particular region is also looking at the printouts, as you can see up in the right corner here. So they want to keep a bit track of where, in this case, medical records are being printed on paper, mainly to follow up, to make sure that those papers are then destroyed in shredders and not just in a dumpster on the back of the hospital. Anyway, so this is the entire region. And then when you zoom in on a particular department, it gets so much more manageable. So, again, the starting point is over 700 unique combinations. But out of those, there are 63 that haven't been there physically, and 4 who don't have medications. So this becomes very, very manageable. And this is where they typically start looking into, and they work their way up. And then they do some complementary spot checking as well on top of this, just to make sure that they cover all bases. But that's how you can also visualize it for the central teams. And then you can create more maybe more operative so-called search templates, where you can enter filtering criteria here in the boxes on the right. And these widgets, these tables and graphs will then adjust accordingly. So you can have a look at, if you want to focus on a specific department or specific user or specific patient or whatever, you can dial that in here and have everything change accordingly. Of course, you can also go in, like I showed you, you can also go in and search directly in the raw logs and make your investigations from there. And then once you have a search result, you can put it into a graph or a report or whatever. So that's, I guess, the scope of it. It's a great complementary product to a traditional LogPoint server, where you have application logs that need to be reviewed by, as I said, non-technical users. Again, IT people are great for looking into IT products, but you really need the experts on the various administrative systems to cover these things. So with the security and the permissions-based access and the built-in workflow that allows you to scale this into quite large organizations, and the integration with the LogPoint, which allows you to adapt this over time also in a very flexible way as you grow and as new ideas of new use cases come up, you can adapt it over time without too much work. Makes it a really powerful combination. Right, so I think I will stop there and see if I have any questions. Okay, so I have a question about the price on top. How is it licensed? That's a good question. So it's typically licensed either, as many of the customers that we have been working with, they already have so-called site licenses, and we sort of included in a bigger sort of deal where we cap the price for an entire site. But otherwise, I believe it's licensed by user. There's like a starting point, and then it's licensed per user. But that's, I think, a discussion you can have with your local LogPoint sales people. Because it really is a difference. If you take a medical region like the ones I've been working with which may have even a number of hospitals, they probably have hundreds of users using applied analytics, hundreds of users using applied analytics. And there might also be outside users, outside the customer's sort of legal entity that need to access the applied analytics. So we work out some pricing, typically based on a per user basis. Whereas, let's say it's an SAP team in a company, which is maybe 10, 20 people, we would have to figure something else out. So again, the licensing is sort of fixed and predictable, but we will probably use different pricing for different types of implementations. And I also want to reiterate that the actual platform is provided by us. So we provide the LogPoint server and the applied analytics application, and they are sort of the platforms where you can build this stuff. But we really rely on our partners to identify and take the time with the customers to identify the use cases and also do the implementation, and many times also the training for the customers. And at least in the medical sector here in Sweden, that has turned out to be ongoing, long relationships between the partner and the customer, and it's I hope and assume good money for the partner. Since this is consultancy that is being done. And one thing that happens when you install a system like this, it might very well be the first time that the users who have been maybe using a particular application for even many years, it might be the first time they actually see the logs in a way that they can use them. And that can kind of open up a whole box of possibilities and ideas, which is great. You just have to sit down with them and prioritize, where do we start? What's the most important stuff, and how do we get there? So again, but that's something our partners handle. We don't really have professional services in that true sense. It's something done by consultants from our partners. I hope that's answer to the question. Any other questions? I hope this was interesting for you guys. I hope this gave you maybe some ideas to break out of the box a little bit and think about new areas where you can deploy these kind of systems. It could be an existing LogPoint customer that may or may not have this need, or may not be aware that they can do this. It could also be a completely new customer where we've seen in several cases here in Sweden that the customer buys applied analytics. That's really what they want, and they sort of get the LogPoint server as part of the deal. So there are several ways to swing this. All right. If there are no more questions, I would like just to thank you guys for participating today. I will make this presentation available. So if you want to have the copy of the slides, you can contact us, and we'll send it to you in PDF form, I assume. Yes. So have a good day for the rest of the day, everybody, and thanks for listening in.